welcome to Fine is a four-letter word. My guest today is Lana McAra. Welcome to the show, Lana.
Thank you so much, Lori. I am excited to be with you today.
Yeah, I was just so intrigued by your story when we did our pre-show conversation. I thought, yeah, people need to hear this story, and not just because it is mm, I don't know if dramatic is the right word, but or a little bit sensational, but you have important information to share with people. So let's
Yes.
jump in and let me ask you the first question of what were the values and beliefs that you were raised with that contributed you to who you became?
That is such a good question. I think that's the first time anybody's ever asked me that. I grew up in the Amish community in the country in Western Delaware. My family of origin, greater family, was actually a transplant from Ohio Amish. And the reason I say that is because there's different brands of Amish. Most people don't know that. There's the
Hmm.
Pennsylvania Amish and the Ohio Amish and the Kentucky Amish and so forth. And we were the Delaware Amish, but the Delaware is a transplant of Ohio. So I was brought up in a very conservative, rigid family system. Now that meant, dad is the wage earner. He's the boss. He tells what goes on in the house. Mom cooks dinner and takes care of the kids, that kind of thing. But so I had that in my formative years. But my mother was a rebel. She never obeyed the rules. She was always doing outrageous things. And my dad was scandalized, his family was scandalized, and I was just a little girl. I didn't really understand what it meant that my mother didn't wear her bonnet when she went to the store. I mean, that was just
I was going to
normal.
ask what are the scandalizing things she did? My gosh, didn't wear a
Yeah,
bonnet.
didn't wear a bonnet. She did not wear black stockings. She went without stockings, bare-legged. And that was scandalous. But she always said, we're so poor, I can't buy stockings to go to the store. I have to have them to go to church. And it was true.
Mm.
I was raised very
Hmm.
poor. I didn't really know that I was poor because my mother cooked from scratch. She made all my clothes. I didn't know what went into getting the material and the fabric for my coats and so forth, but it was a thing, right? So,
Hmm.
yeah, so I was in that dynamic of very conservative, but at the same time, rule breaking.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I
Okay. And
grew
so
up with
then
all the
go
all the
ahead.
homemaking skills, from a child, cooking, cleaning, taking care of children. I was the oldest child, so I was always caregiving for the younger children. So I was taught to be a mother from the time I was 6 years old. I was sweeping the floor at 6, washing dishes by hand at 6. At 6 years
How
old, when I
many
started school, I went to work.
how many younger siblings do you have?
4.
Okay.
Yeah, I was the oldest of 5.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay. And then how did that go ahead?
3 of them were quite a bit younger. So yeah, my brother was only 2 years younger, but then there was a big gap, and the 3 younger ones looked at me as mother, like mother number 2. Yeah.
Hmm. What like what did your father do?
He was a handyman in those days. He worked for a hospital repairing equipment and making sure everything was running and managing plumbing and all that. So he was kind of a guy that did almost everything. And actually, after my parents divorced when I was 13, another scandalous thing that happened.
I was just gonna wait a minute. They got divorced?
My mother filed for divorce. Yeah, she kicked him out, filed for divorce. She's like, I don't care. I'm done with this.
Did she stay in the community then, or did she leave the Amish community?
We were in the Mennonite church at that time, and they kicked us completely out. We were out. Now, family didn't shun us like they would have, sometimes, but yeah, we were totally out of the church for sure. Um, But when the divorce happened, my father went back to trade school and he became an electrician, licensed electrician. And then he went back and got all five trades:
Hmm.
electrician, plumbing, mechanical. He did all of it. He was a very smart, very accomplished guy. And so the divorce was actually good for him. It got him out of the, working at the hospital as a handyman job, and he had his own
Hmm.
business and so forth. So I always loved and respected my father. My father was a very stable person in my world at that time. Later, I found out that was a childish, a childish imagination that really wasn't
Okay.
quite as true as I thought. But it did help me get through my challenging teenage years.
And then how did those beliefs and those values and those stories that you created help you or hinder you as you became an adult?
Well, I was looking for stability because my mother married a very volatile man immediately. As soon as the divorce was final, 2 weeks later, she married this guy. And he was a violent, mentally ill, criminal type. He was
Mm.
always running scams, beating my mother, beating the children. Um,
Wow.
he was a scary guy. And during those years, I was always holding on to the fact, and I would actually tell my siblings, because here I am, mom role, right?
Hmm.
Our father's not like this. Our father has a job, he's honest, he pays his bills, and he doesn't hit people. And I just kept telling them that and telling them that because my younger siblings were pretty young. My youngest sister was 5 years old when this
And
happened.
they didn't, now you didn't have any contact with your father?
No, he moved across the country. I didn't have
Oh,
any relationship with my father for 30 years. He just
mm,
abandoned us. He abandoned
wow.
us. Well,
Okay.
looking back now, I mean, my mother was a screaming demon. She was
Yeah.
terrible. And he was protecting himself, right? But he had
Hmm.
5 children,
Hmm.
which he
Yeah.
questioned our parentage. He
Well,
was
I was
always
gonna
saying,
say, if she got married 2 weeks after, like she didn't know him before.
"Oh yeah." He was always
Right.
saying, "I'm not sure which of these kids are really mine," and he was had a valid question there. Later
Hmm.
on, we found out more.
Hmm.
So, but even at that, you're a man. You're in a family with 5 children. They call you dad. You sit at dinner with them every night. You hold them when they're infants and help them ride a bike. And you're going to just turn away and walk away from those kids and say, I don't know which ones are mine.
Hmm.
I can't understand that. As a parent now, you know, I mean, I'm the mother. I know who those kids belong to. But
Right.
if I had been in a situation, why would I do that? That's a child. That is a
Hmm.
human being with a future. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I always go back to then what was his childhood like and how like you said he felt like he had to protect himself from her craziness. And so people do things that we don't necessarily understand but make perfect sense to them.
Yes, yes. And my father had mental health concerns. And I think looking back now, because I had a short term relationship with my father in his older years when he was in his 70s. And what
Mhm.
I realized at that point was that he had either Asperger's or some other situation where he was extremely smart, but very socially incapable of forming attachments. And so, for him, he didn't have the attachment to the children
Right.
that I, have to my children
Or
because it
that
wasn't
one would expect somebody to have to their own children. And
exactly.
yeah, and this is where it comes back to like, okay, what else is going on in that person's life?
Exactly, exactly. Yes. And I was 13 when they divorced. So, I was just a kid. I had no idea about anything like that. And this was in the 70s. People didn't know about mental health things
Mhm.
like they do now. And so my mother did have challenges with him, no doubt. She did.
Mhm.
She
Mhm.
was the biggest challenge, though, by far.
Yeah. And to your point, you mentioned something that is important to pull out, and that is you were a kid. And so you didn't know all of this other stuff. You were making up a story in your head that made sense to you that would protect you that about the situation. And then we carry these stories and these beliefs into adulthood, and the results we see in our life come from those beliefs that we have that we don't necessarily know like how they got instilled in us, but we keep telling ourselves that story. I was saying last night I did a presentation, an in-person presentation. I was saying that beliefs are simply thoughts that we keep thinking over and over again. It's a story we keep telling ourselves, right?
Yes, absolutely. That was a protection story that I had,
Mm-hmm.
and it came up naturally. I think my in my spiritual walk, I would say my guides, were whispering in my ear to help me
Mm-hmm.
through that crazy
Right.
time because I did emerge a stable, grounded individual. I created my life intentionally. I didn't always make the best decisions, but I was not off the charts like my mother was. My
Yeah.
mother was extremely unstable emotionally, and her decisions were life threatening. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about some of those decisions that you made, because you have there's more to the story. Share. Share
Yeah.
what became of that.
When I was in
Cuz
therapy
you
after the
said
divorce,
you made it, you said you were looking for stability. And so
yes,
let's,
yes.
yeah, go in from that
When I was in
angle.
therapy, after my divorce, I went into therapy for 2 years, and my therapist said to me about, I don't know, 6 months in, he said, every time you come in, it's more, it's more and more and more. Um, So what I did was, and I met this guy the first week of college. First of all, I just determined I was going to college. My
Mhm.
mother and my stepfather were against me going. They wanted me to stay home, go to community college, live at home so I could keep working and caregiving for them.
Mhm.
There you go.
Right, that makes sense.
Yes, but I was determined I was going to college. I was really going to college, not just go to community college. And so I did get a scholarship. I made all the applications. I did it all myself, and I worked a job to pay my way. And I met this guy the first week of school. Now, he was very stable. And looking back now, I married him. I was married to him for 30 years. He was rigid, he was emotionless, he was extremely demanding, and he was a covert narcissist. Covert narcissism doesn't present as pride and domination, it presents as downtrodden, doing the best I can, don't harass me because I'm overwhelmed constantly. Nobody understands my value. My boss is disrespecting me and so forth. And so don't add to my woes, little wifey woman,
Mm.
by
Mhm.
giving me your problems. I can't handle them right now. So he basically pushed me away from him, and I had to manage all the household finances on my own, the children, and all the medical things that go with having seven children. I was the one who took them to the doctor. I was the one who made the decisions. I found insurances. I was the one who paid the bills. I made the decisions about car insurance, health insurance, house insurance, all those things. If there was ever an issue in any area of our lives, it was on me. If the
Mhm.
car broke down, that was on me to find somebody to replace it, get a tow truck, do whatever it took to make that happen because he's over here overwhelmed. And if I
Yeah, well,
rely on him, it'll never happen.
And didn't you take on that role because it was what you had always done in your life? Like you were the stable one raising your siblings. You were the one who was doing everything already. So that just felt probably comfortable to you.
I was totally good with it. For at the beginning, I was totally good with it. I was
Yeah.
what I'd done all along, and it wasn't until later when I got to be, say, mid 40s that
Hmm.
my health was breaking down. I had too much, and even at the end of my 30s, I was already starting to feel the physical effects of this overwork, overburdened thing. I mean,
Hmm.
we were traveling. My ex-husband is a pastor, and we were missionaries overseas for 14 years. So that meant we had to pack a container of our household goods, ship overseas, get it through customs, bring it to the house. And so that whole packing thing, that involves
Hmm.
boxes that are numbered, and you make a bill of lading and catalog everything in each box. That has to be typed and organized and sent with the container so that when it arrives, the person at the dock is looking at the contents of this. That was 100% on me,
Mm.
along with raising 7 children, taking care of all the household stuff and the medical stuff. And we did it twice. So he did go to the dock. He did clear it through customs because as a woman in a third world country, they won't talk to me.
Right, right. So he was forced to
They
have to do something.
It
Yeah,
would be very
some part.
humiliating for him to send his wife to the dock to
Hmm.
get the
Hmm.
container,
Hmm.
The men would be looking at
Right,
him like, what is wrong with him? Is he mentally ill?
right, right,
Yeah.
right. Where are his
So,
pants?
exactly. So when we were overseas, he had to step up more because the culture wouldn't
Hmm.
tolerate
Hmm.
me being the one in those roles. So that was kind of good for me. I was, happy about that when we were over there. Um, and we were over there from 1987 until 2001, 14 years, and it was very difficult.
Where was overseas?
We were in the Caribbean on the island of Grenada, where Reagan sent the troops for an intervention in 1984, 83, 84, something like that. We went
Hmm.
in 87, 4 years later, as missionaries. And we lived in the bush. We lived back in a village in the jungle for all those years. And I had the time of my life there. It took us away from all the constraints of being in the US. We think we have a free country here. Well, think again, people. Back
Hmm.
there, they didn't care how we schooled our kids. They didn't care what we did. I mean, we were totally free to do whatever we wanted. People were riding in the back of pickup trucks. I'm talking about 20 people packed into the back of a pickup truck and going down the road at 70 miles an hour on these hairpin turns up the mountain. They thought nothing of it. We would have been arrested,
Hmm.
if we did that here. So yeah, when I got back, it was really difficult to remember all the rules and school the children to obey various things that we see as normal here. We are extremely controlled in this environment in the United States. We don't realize how much. And now 20 years later, I'm used to it. I just take it as part of life here.
Oh,
But
right. Well, you've been re-socialized back into our
yes,
society.
yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So you were in Grenada and where else?
We went 2 different times and we shipped containers.
Oh, same
We were
place,
still
but two different times.
two
Gotcha.
different times, all right, exactly.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, so married to a pastor, there are additional expectations on you.
oh yeah. Not only were there his expectations, there were church expectations. And of
Hmm.
course, he's monitoring the church expectations very, very strictly. We went to church 3 times a week, twice on Sunday, once in the middle of the week, either Wednesday or Thursday night, one or the other. And I taught Sunday school. I taught the women. I was homeschooling my children back in the jungle. And every every time I left for church, he would look me over to make sure I passed muster.
Hmm.
he would say things to me like, "Are you going to put a sweater on over that?" Because if I had a sleeveless dress on, he didn't want my
Oh,
arms showing. So,
right.
I mean, that
That
wasn't
would be
even a rule.
scandalous.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. The scandalous piece of our lives, shoulders showing. Um,
Uh-huh.
so, it was humiliating for me. Like, I've been married to you now for 20 years. You think I don't know how you want me to dress? And besides
Right.
that, you want me to dress this way. I don't have the freedom to make up my own wardrobe and feel free to do what I want. Which I wasn't my mother. I was a very,
Right.
yeah, traditional person.
Although I sometimes would think that because of having that side of you, having her genes, that you would have somewhat rebelled and said, "Hey, you can't tell me what to do."
Oh yeah. That didn't show up right away.
Uh-huh.
When trying to think, it was in 1991. Um, I had a break with my mother. So I got married in 1979. So 1991. About 12 years. Yeah. Yeah, it was about 12 years in because my youngest son was a baby, an infant.
Mhm.
My mother had an attack on her family. She launched an attack on her family. She became very malicious as she grew older, and of course, my stepfather with her. And we had the kids enrolled in school because we were in the States at that time. We had to go back and report our mission work, every so many years. And so we were in
Mhm.
for that. And we did have the kids enrolled in school, but we were traveling a lot because one of the things my ex wanted was to parade all 7 kids into the church when we were reporting, and they would sing or something. And he had taught them how to stand at our display table and talk to people and answer questions about Grenada and stuff like that. And so our kids were part of the cell job, right? And so
Mhm.
we
I,
would bring books and travel together.
I'm getting visions of The Sound of Music.
Yes, yes, very, very similar. Very similar, yes. And he loved that movie, by the way. He absolutely loved that movie. Loves,
Uh-huh.
still living. So yeah, it was like that. If you've seen The Sound of Music, stair step kids, they march in, they sing, whatever. So we had been traveling, to these churches, and it was all school approved, and we were bringing work and all that. And one day I had a knock on the door, and it was a truant officer from the county with a report that our kids were not in school. And there was a social worker with him, and everything was fine. The school vouched for us; they had no problem. We never were in danger of anything. Our bases were covered. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done with her. I cannot have my kids around her in any way, shape, or form, and I'm done.
Is she the one who sent the truant officer?
Her and my stepfather, I never got the details of it, but it was them behind
Okay.
that whole situation. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
verified. My children heard things said. My brother came over and told me um,
Okay.
that they
And
were.
I imagine that would have been embarrassing for your husband as well.
It was embarrassing for him. It was terrifying for me to think someone would
Sure.
take my children because of this, these allegations that were so groundless. I mean, I was mom of the year.
Mhm.
you know,
Right,
I'm,
right, right. You were
I'm
doing everything humanly and beyond humanly possible to provide for your
absolutely,
family. Yeah.
yeah. I'm cooking from scratch. I'm watching all their diets. I'm taking them to the doctor and making sure they have their vitamins. And I'm got school lessons. We're doing school
Yeah.
lessons, and I'm watching their grades. And I mean, you name it, I was on it. And so anyway, the accusation was totally unfounded, but it was part of their malicious thing that they had going on. And I mean, it wasn't just me. It was my sisters and so forth were all under
Mhm.
attack from those people. They're just awful, awful, terrible people. So I broke with
Yeah.
my family. Well, we went back to Grenada. We stayed there for 5 years. I had no contact with my mother. I had no contact with my siblings. I broke with everybody because my siblings were still enmeshed with her. I knew if I told them anything about my life, they would go right to her and tell her, and then it would, start the cycle
Mhm.
over.
Mhm.
I needed a clean break from
This
that
this was
situation.
about setting boundaries for you.
Yes, absolutely. Had to set firm boundaries. I mean, one like a
Even
brick
when it
wall.
Yeah, even when it involves, or especially when it involves family.
Yes,
And how
yes.
difficult was that?
It was
Especially
hard. I
again
love
with
my
your yeah, with
siblings.
your siblings, exactly.
I
Probably
raised those
easier to do
kids.
with your mom, but not so much with your siblings.
Yeah, yeah. I raised those kids. I knew what a trial and trauma she was to them. She was
Mhm.
hurting them too. Um, but I had to protect my family. I had to put my kids first before anyone in the world, and I
Mhm.
did. So that's how that all came
Yeah.
out.
You
But what
mentioned a little
happened?
bit earlier. You mentioned a little bit earlier about the physical problems that were caused by the stress. Like tell me about how that manifested, and then what it forced you to do, because it forced you to face some things that maybe you didn't want to face, and make some decisions
Yes,
that
yes, absolutely.
people around you wouldn't have seen coming.
Right. I had back issues from the time I was 26. My back was in terrible pain. I was carrying too much, doing too much, working too hard, wearing
Yeah.
myself out. And so back pain, 10 years of serious back pain, constant pain. That was one piece of it. Then I ended up with surgery. Then it ended up with a second surgery, major abdominal surgery, and on and on. My thyroid started to quit. I had hypothyroidism that was untreated for about 5 years. I was gaining weight. I was miserable and depressed. And then when the kids got older, instead of the workload getting less, the workload got more. And that was because when they were at home, I had chores and everybody did chores. But now I have four young adult men, my sons, in the house, and they're working. They're going to college. They're got girlfriends and they're playing sports and all these outside of the house things that they're doing. And I had 100% of the work on me. So now I
Mhm.
have four men plus my husband, five. And that wasn't enough. My brother in law moved in because he had a mental breakdown. So he asked me if he could come and live with us. And I said yes. So I
Did
had
you
him.
know did you know that the physical symptoms were caused by all of this, the burdens that you were carrying? Did you
No,
realize it at the time? No.
I was close to that. I was not seeing that as what was happening. Now I know. But then I
Mhm.
just
Mhm.
thought, I need to check and see if I need another vitamin. I need to take more
Yeah.
vitamins.
Okay.
That was basically it.
What was the last straw that you said, I can't go on this way anymore?
I was so exhausted I could hardly crawl out of bed. I was working from 7 in the morning till 11 at night, and I would fall into bed exhausted. I would get up and do it again and again and again. And by this time, my brother in law had been living with us for 15 months. I had been taking care of him like a child, carrying him to the doctor, taking care of his paperwork, all that stuff, because he was a veteran and he had a breakdown because of being over in Iraq.
Mm.
And I felt bad for him. Of course, I'm feeling bad for everybody. I felt bad for everyone
Mhm.
except for myself.
Except for yourself, exactly. Mhm.
So I got a call from a friend. I actually called her, but we talked. It was a friend I hadn't talked to in 20 years. And gave her a little, like, 5-minute rundown of what was happening in my life. And she said to me, I've known ever since we got on the call something's wrong. Because she hadn't talked to me in all that time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And she said, "You're about to have a breakdown. This is too much for you. Your husband is dead wrong," she said. "You need to
Mhm.
get out of that house. They're gonna take you down." And when she said it, I knew that she was telling me the truth. I felt like I was getting a
Mhm.
message from God that day.
I
Yeah.
just had that same thought as you were saying what she said to you. I'm thinking, the universe, God's talking to you through her. And then you just said that.
I
Yes.
talked to her later. It wasn't right away because I went through some serious trauma leaving. But I don't know, 2 years later, I talked to her and she did not remember that conversation.
Wow.
It was that important. And she was that, tough love on me. And she didn't
Yeah. But
remember.
sometimes when people, this has been my experience, are channeling messages like that, and we'll just
Yes.
say channeling a message, it's coming through them, but they're not really aware of what they're saying because it's not them. And that to me, that she doesn't remember is more proof of that's what happened.
I was shocked. I was
Hmm.
shocked that she didn't
Because it was
remember
so
because that was a
impactful for you.
yes, and it was important and it was unusual because she was very deep in the church. She was an extremely conservative Christian woman and she was telling me to leave my pastor husband.
Hmm.
I got off
Hmm.
the phone. I'm like, "Whoa, that woman would never say that."
Yeah.
And then she
Yeah.
didn't remember.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
you did end up leaving,
Yes, I did.
and yeah. And how did you heal yourself from all of this trauma that you and the burdens that you had taken on like that? Because again, going back to, those are deeply ingrained beliefs and stories you told yourself about who you were, and
Oh
now
yeah.
you need to rewire your brain to become somebody else, to become a better version of yourself.
Yes, it was a process. It was definitely a process. I started out by going to my sister, who is a counselor. She's a licensed therapist, and she found me someone to see. And so I went to this person for a few sessions. I didn't like the woman. She was way too restricted for me. I needed somebody with a broader perspective because I was so locked in. I was locked
Hmm.
down not only ideologically, with a conservative viewpoint, but I was also locked down emotionally, mentally. I was just
Hmm.
in a little tiny box.
Yeah.
So one thing at a time, and it was so amazing the way it happened because here I am, a pastor's wife for 30 years. I'm scared of my own shadow. I'm afraid the devil's behind every bush. And so
Hmm.
I am so terrified of everything, and terrified of earning a living, terrified of being alone, all of it.
Hmm.
And I had a friend that this was before I left him. I met someone at a networking event, or it was actually at a training event, because I was doing internet marketing. On That was my side job, was internet marketing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I went to an internet marketing event, and this lady sat next to me, and she was this petite, cute little lady, very, very quiet and non-scary, right? And she said to me, "I'm taking a certification and I need to practice on someone to get hours. Would you mind if I practice on you?" Well, that was the perfect question for me because I'm like, "Oh, yes, I'll help you out. I want to help you
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
And I said, "What is it?" She said, "Oh, it's called tapping. It's EFT tapping." And I said, "Well,
Hmm.
what's that?" She said, "Well, you just tap your fingers here and here and on your chest, and you tap and you say these things, and I'll help you." That's what I'm doing. I'm teaching people to do that, and I'm doing it with them. I said, "Oh, that doesn't sound scary at all. Sure, I'll do it." And so after the event, she and I would Skype.
Hmm.
And I was scared that my husband would walk in the room when I'm on the computer doing this. I just knew
Hmm.
he wouldn't approve of it. So I told her, "I don't want your face and your voice on the screen. So let's do it through the texting part of Skype, the messaging part."
Hmm.
And so she would type in, tap here and say this, and I would tap and say this. And of course, I'm saying it under my breath because I don't want him to
Hmm.
hear me. And within the first session, within 5 to 10 minutes, I am sobbing.
Yep.
It went right into childhood trauma. I was astounded at the depth of the work that was happening. I worked with her for 2 years. Eventually, I started paying her. instead of being her
Mhm.
practice
Mhm.
person.
Right.
I worked, and I think working with her with the tapping helped me when I had to make that transition and leave my family. I was able to get through it because I was working with her, and we worked together for a long time. So that was a key moment in my transition. And then I met someone else at another business event because then I went into internet marketing after I left him. I couldn't earn a living. I had no job resume for 30
Mhm.
years. I was
Right.
52 years old. No job resume. What am I going to do? I found out the only way I could earn a living is become an entrepreneur. Well,
Which is
I'm
a
Miss Can Do
fantastic
girl.
way to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm Miss Can
Yes.
Do. I can do anything. I've got
Uh-huh.
and I'm not afraid to work, right?
Yes.
So that's what I did. I started that, and I was at a networking event, and this woman came up to me. It was another one of those God moments. She had this fluffy
Mhm.
hair, this big fluffy hair, and she was a matronly looking kind of woman in her, like 50 years old or so. And she put her hands on my table because I had a table there, and
Mhm.
she leaned forward and she stared in my eyes and she said, "You and I are going to do great things together." And
Wow.
I went, "What? you know, who are you? you know,
Right. Who are you?
are you a crazy person?"
Uh-huh. Right.
She
Because
said,
my
"I'm an
antennas are up for crazy people.
crazy is coming out, right? I know about
I
crazy."
recognize crazy.
Yeah, yeah. She said, "I'm an ICU nurse and I have learned the emotion code, and I'm gonna do a session on you a free session on you." I said, "What's the emotion code?" She said, "Well, it's emotions that are locked in the body." And I said, "Well, what do you do for it?" She said, "It's magnets. You run magnets over the center of your body." And I thought, well, magnets isn't scary. I can do
Mhm.
that. I said, "Do I have to come to your office?" She said, "No, we'll do it on the phone." I was like, "Wait a minute. How's she going to run magnets over me? We're on the phone." I
Mhm.
didn't know, but
Mhm.
I went with it. I went with it. I knew I was supposed to do that. So I did. Again, 5 minutes in, I'm sobbing. She brought up the fact that I was molested when I was 6. It was a memory I had not brought up
Mm.
for many years. And it was a family member. It wasn't my father or anybody like that. It was an older family
Mhm.
member. And, that forgotten memory, that pushed away and locked up memory came through. And again, I worked with her for several years. She was the most amazing person, breaking through the heart walls and the hidden stuff in my body and all the pain I'd been having and all of the different things. Because the emotion code, if you get the book, The Emotion Code by Dr.
Mhm.
Bradley Nelson, it actually has a chart of which emotions affect which organs. And Louise Hay talks about this too. But
Mhm.
the charts in there, and also muscle testing. So I got the book.
Yes.
I learned muscle testing from that book, and that's when my healing journey escalated. It just went on high drive from that point on, because once I learned muscle testing, I could test different modalities. Is this something that would help
Yeah.
me? Muscle test, yes. Okay, I'll do that
Right.
one. And then I would go to the
Yeah.
next one and the next one.
I
Yeah.
use muscle testing. My friend Jen, who is a past podcast guest, Jen Beck, taught me about muscle testing yourself because I knew how other people could do muscle testing on you, but she taught me about using it for myself. And I use it now for taking like supplements or stuff and things like that. Like, is this, right and appropriate for my body today? Because it could change. So you could be taking something that served you, a month ago, but now you don't need it.
Oh, it's so interesting because I do exactly that every morning. I have my
Uh-huh.
supplements in a line on a shelf, and I go down the shelf. This one, this one, this one, every single morning. That was what my morning supplement regimen is.
I love
That's
it. I
very
love it.
cool.
Yeah, so cool.
Yeah.
We could spend the next 4 hours talking. I've so enjoyed this conversation. And I have two last questions for you.
Mhm.
One, you have now, I don't know, were you allowed or did you enjoy music during your childhood and your, while you were married? Like it sounds like it was so rigid. Was music a part of that?
My mother
Other
was a big
outside of
time,
church music?
right. My mother was a big time country western fan, and she always had the radio going. And she listened to some popular music too. So she
Okay.
always had the radio going. So those old songs, I know them all. And when they come on, somewhere, I recognize them, which is why I
Uh-huh.
chose the song I have
Yeah.
today.
What is this song? What is your hype song that you listen to
It
that
is
boosts your
You Don't
energy?
Mess Around with Jim. You Don't Mess
Right.
Around with Jim. Jim.
Which
Yeah.
should perhaps be changed to "You Don't Mess Around with Lana."
Yeah. Yeah. The chorus of that is you don't tug on Superman's cape. You don't spit into the wind. You don't take the mask off the Lone Ranger, and you don't mess around with Jim.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a story, it's a ballad about these
Yeah.
bullies and how Jim came in and cleaned house with those bullies. And when that comes on, I start dancing. Now I take dance lessons. I love music. I've got music on in my house all the time. It's part of my freedom because that wasn't
Mm-hmm.
happening in the pastor's house. Um, but you know what? You come at me enough and I'll bear it
Yeah.
30 effing years,
Right.
but no more.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been through the dating world. I had a stalker at one time. I mean, different things have happened to me since. But this person right here is a very strong, resilient human being. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not taking anything off anybody anymore. Now, that's not to say that I'm mean. I love people. I
Right.
want to help people. I do as
Right.
much as I can for people when I can. But the person with that energy, that bully energy, that forcing, disrespectful, demeaning energy, no, not anymore.
It's
Yeah,
about having your own boundaries and standing up for yourself. That's what it's
exactly.
not. Yeah, it's not about not being a kind person. It's about being so kind that you take care of yourself.
Yes, and I'm aware that I overgive. So when I start to feel pressed on or I start to feel like I'm getting overextended, I pull it back. I
Yeah,
pull it
now
back.
you
I set a boundary
recognize.
on myself.
Mm-hmm. Right. And now you recognize how to do that.
Yes. Yes.
Wow. This has been such a good conversation. If someone wants to reach out to you and connect with you, where is the best place for them to do that?
Instagram.
Okay.
Instagram. My name on Instagram is Lana McAra and the number 2. Yeah. If
Okay.
you're not on Instagram, then my website is lanamccara.com. But people message me on Instagram. You don't have to know me to message me on Instagram. I'm welcome. You're welcome to message me. I love it when people reach
Awesome.
out.
I will put links to both of those places in the show notes so it can be
Awesome.
easy for people to find. Lana, thank you so much for joining me today on Fine is a 4-letter word.
Thank you.